Sup nerds, I'm Tom. Today we're going to take a look at Revenant by Mindclash Games. This is a prototype because the game is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. So I'm going to start off with my normal disclaimers that this is a prototype, right? So none of the components you see are final. Art can be changed. Even like rules can be tweaked. There was even like a disclaimer in the prototype rulebook I got said like, hey, this one section here, we might be changing some of the numbers on how this works, so like the overall feel of the game is still the same, but anything can, this card that costs 2 could cost 3 or something like that, And also, if you know anything about Mindclash games, they generally do pretty heavy games, so this is on the heavier side. So of course, I'm not going to go over every single rule or anything like that. I'm just going to give you a broad overview of sort of how the game works, how it plays, so you can see if it's right for you. At its core, Revenant is a worker placement game with sort of a semi-co-op aspect. So you're going to be placing workers out onto the main board, or really out on 2 different ships that are on the main board to take actions, gain points, build up your engine and all that kind of stuff. But there are also, bad guy ships, the Voidfall, I believe. Actually, this is thematically based on Voidfall. I actually haven't played Voidfall, so any of the connections from this one to Voidfall I won't really be able to talk about too much, so there. But at the end of every round, these Voidfall ships, which again I believe is what they are going to be doing damage to your ships that have the worker placement spots on them, and they could go away, and now not only do you not have access to those spots, there are actions that you can take that will bring them back. But at least for a certain period of time, you will not have access to those actions. But also, whenever you place a worker on a ship, they all have these faction symbols on them, and that will allow you to advance on the track for that faction, which both gets you immediate awards and, most importantly, endgame scoring, because your sort of allegiance with that faction multiplied by how many ships of that faction are out on the board will be a big endgame point swing for you. So it's actually possible that you're like, well, look, this sector right here that has this ship on it, there's a lot of bad ships that are going to deal damage to it, and maybe it'll explode at the end of the round, but you know what? Maybe I don't even really care. Sure, maybe I do want to do that action, but also, maybe Wes is really investing heavily in that faction. He's advanced on that track a whole bunch, and maybe has a lot of cards in his hand that are for that faction, so I'm actually okay with that ship blowing up. Now, he's going to have to be the one who's wasting time taking actions to bring that ship back, so that he can, get his points back. And that probably is the biggest chunk of the game to understand, the idea that it's worker placement onto the ships that, could blow up. Some of the ships are just there to, fight back against the ships. There's also an aspect here where you can do a jump, which kind of warps you to a new area. And there are cards. Where did I put them? There are cards that you could jump to that sort of reset the board, so you could look at it and say, it might be worth it for me to take this action to warp us to a new area. And there's other aspects in terms of there's a track that you have over here that could be affected by that decision. So not only will you be clearing up the ships here, but you could gain benefits from it as well, depending on where you are in this track over here. So ultimately, there are several ways to mitigate, the damage and blowing up of your worker placement ships. And there is a little bit of teamwork there, but not too much. So again, it's semi-co-op, because it is ultimately still a competitive game. But there will be times that you will reset the board at the end of the round where we're adding more of the bad ships, and it just looks like crazy. You do there's a lot of times when you'll roll a die to see how many ships get added into what sectors, and you may be looking at it and being like, oh my god, what are we gonna do? So now that I've talked about the sort of semi-co-op aspect of it, what are you trying to do for you to score points? Well, the main thing is the tracks over here, the different factions. That is a huge chunk of points. There are, of course, other points, but you're going to advance up on the track here, and you're also going to be able to get cards that are for the faction as well. So at the end of the game, you're going to add the cards to where you are on the track, and then multiply that by the number up at the top of your faction track, and that can be anywhere from 1 to 4 based on how many ships are out here. So again, incentivizing you to not let your ships blow up, but also you can take the action where you spend 1 of each resource and add another ship onto the board. There's also tons of upgrade cards, so you can actually upgrade your player board with just static effects. After you do something, you'll gain benefits or points or resources or get to, clear damage. But also, when you have your workers, you have your captain and then your 2 smaller workers. and you can upgrade the smaller workers, so that way when you place this one worker out, this worker does more special things or gains resources or does an action better than the other workers you have. You also have a player track on your board, or the captain's track, that you can take an action out on the main board to increase, which helps you do kind of a lot of things. Gives you more special abilities, lets you look at and sometimes even keep more cards when you draw for the faction. Lots of stuff going on there. You also have bonus actions that you can do at the end of every turn. You're going to place a worker, advance on the track from wherever you, whatever ship you went on, choose the action you're going to do. Actually, you can also move the ship prior to doing the action. And then you're going to take a bonus action on your board, which are more like, okay, gaining resources, advancing on the tactics track, drawing more cards. But also, your board can get corrupted, as can the ships. So I talked about the ships taking damage, but they can also take corruption, which are these weird hammerhead shark looking tokens. So those can go onto the ships, and they can also go on your player board, and you can spend actions to clear those off. So when these go onto your player board, they are covering up a section for a bonus action that you would take at the end of your turn. So like if I put this over here, okay, now I can no longer take the gain an extra resource action at the end of my turn, but I'm also locking in the resources that are there. There are 2 resource spots per bonus action section, and whenever you put a token there, you're locking those up. So clearing those off is an action, but also they will go onto a little card here, and once you have 3, it'll allow you to draw another card. So you're not just spending actions, putting out fires, you are gaining some benefits from putting out those fires. You also have some endgame scoring cards that you're dealt at the beginning of the game, one of which you will score by the end, which usually incentivizes you to pick certain tracks, certain strategies over here, and also will give you bonuses for the certain board states. But overall, I feel like I've gotten through, as I'm saying this, about 80% of how the game works, right, without getting into too much detail, which is to say that this is a heavier game, but probably not the heaviest that Mindclash has put out. Definitely, more accessible, a bit easier to teach. Things do flow together pretty well, and I think a lot of things are pretty intuitive. Again, the idea of you can see how much damage the ships can take, and you'd be like, well, actually it's okay if we let these ships take damage because I don't really care about that, or I can move this ship from over here. I mean, there's other things. There's more stuff I haven't mentioned yet, like there's planet cards that you can land on to take extra actions. I didn't really go over too much about the tactics track, which does include how turn order works, and it also includes, whoever's furthest up will get to decide, well, I guess whoever's closest to, the ships, if the Voidborn, which I just looked up, that's what they're called, the Voidborn are going to deal damage. Who decides what damage goes where? It's whoever is closest with their player ship, but if there's a tie, you'll break ties based on the tactics track. There is a lot of little details like that, but I do think that this game is slightly on the lighter side. Again, this is definitely not Baby's first game, but I do think it is probably a bit easier than something like Anachrony or Cerebria, or, actually I haven't played Voidfall yet, so... But even saying that, if you're a fan of Mindclash games or heavier games or, crunchy Euro games, then yeah, this is going to be an auto include for you guys. I definitely think this game could scratch that itch for having a big, epic, space game that isn't centered around battles. It's not a 4X game. If any of what I was saying in this video sounds interesting to you, I'm going to put a link in the description to the Kickstarter campaign. Definitely back this while you still can, and while you're down there, subscribe to our channel so you'll never be bored.